over to the United States. And with that very short introduction, I'm going to let you go ahead.
Okay. Well, it's really great to see everyone. So when Loudon Public Library asked, how do you want to do this? I said, let's just do a conversation. Have a discussion, maybe share our stories. I didn't want it to be a book sale or any kind of a book event, because I imagine it'd be just my family and friends coming, and and I already peddled the book to you guys, so do that. So I thought maybe we can do this. I'll share some memories that I had. I'll try my best to connect them to, say why I included them. Then I'll go over the historical context of this book. And then I'll talk about some of the unique aspects of this journey. It's not the only journey. A lot of people took this path, but there are a couple unique things about our journey, right? And then more importantly, it was a lot about the people that came into our lives, these characters that came in for just a little bit, and then they're gone, and so I thought that was really good. And then, why did I get around to writing this, and what I really want to get out of this, and maybe hopefully for you guys as well. And then, Q&As. I would love to just leave the bulk of it, excuse me, to just talk, and if you have some stories to share, that'd be great. So with that, let me just share with you a couple of memories. So the first memory that I have, I think, in my life, was I was in a bathroom, I was looking at my dad, not straight at him, and I think I was looking at him, I saw him through a mirror. So I was behind him, I saw him, and his face was really red. I think he was crying, So I think that's an actual memory, because, I don't know why I would have that. But I pieced it together as I think that day was when the fall of Saigon happened. He lost his country. So that's a memory that I had. Sorry, just give it a second. So I had that memory. I didn't include that in the book, but I did include my older brother's memory of that day, because I felt that was probably more reliable. And that's when you saw the first couple chapters where he stood on the third floor with my dad and saw the tanks rolled in. And that's when my dad, looked at him and said, we have to get out of here. So that's a memory that I wanted to share. A second one is this. There was a dirt field, and I saw my dad standing there with a bunch of guys. In front of them were barbed wires. And that's all I remember. Again, not reliable. I don't really know if I had that memory, or why would I have that. I think that was the day they took him away for re-education camp. So again, I didn't include it in the book because I don't know if that was an actual memory or not. But again, I relied on my oldest brother and his memory of that day. And it was actually the night before when, my father took his oldest son and said, before he was going to be taken away, he said, try your best to protect the family. And right away, my brother, when I talked to him about this, he remembered the exact two guns, the make, the model, and how many bullets he had. And he was told, try and defend your family. If not, take their lives. And so he remembered that. I didn't know about it. And then a third memory is, being on a ship lost at sea, and being hungry, and then finding safe harbor. Seeing my mom in a prison. I don't remember how many months she was away, but I remember seeing her face frame the window of this tiny cell, right? But then like a light switch, my memories from there on started to be these. Watching cartoons on Saturday mornings, Super Friends. Watching these commercials that were so cool. They were like, well, cereal, what else? Like Light Bright Battles, Battleship, Star Wars. And then from there on, my memories were like playing in the neighborhoods with some of the people that are here, you know, some of my buddies from so long ago, and of like stressing out about homecoming, stressing about like calling up somebody's house, and back then somebody's dad picked up the phone and he said, you know, is Susie Q there? You know, can I talk to her? You know, that's then became like things that I worried about. And the reason why I brought that up is this. Here's the connection that I always had with Muse. You know, I was really blessed to see gratitude, to see love, to see God, to see God's providence through the lens of a life that was really hard that I could have lived versus the life that I actually got to live. You know, and that shapes my attitude towards everything that's important. And that's why I wrote this book, and that's why this book is about, is I wanted to go back there for me. You know, I wrote it for a bunch of other reasons, but I found out it was for me. I needed to go back there when times are hard or whatever. And I wrote it for, you know, my children. That I think they'll know about these things, but by the time Ari has kids, he's like, what? He's not gonna know. There's no way, you know? And we expect our children to have this grit, have this resiliency, and they don't know the details, and we forget it, right? So that's been the blessing of writing this, and then ultimately is sharing it. You know, I'm amazed that as more that it's being shared, and maybe that can help with people's attitude, and really then to have these conversations, you know, these stories that we share, right? Because I think that really helps us get through a lot of things, you know, as a community. And the more we share like real stories, you know, the less I think we fight with each other, you know, unless your story is like really rotten. And tend to be, the more you know about somebody's lives, the more that you find commonality. So that's really, you know, kind of the overall, you know, purpose or theme about this little story that I wrote about my family. Okay, so historical context. I'm not sure if many people know about the Vietnam War, but I'll just start from here, which is before the United States were involved, the Vietnamese spent many, many years fighting the French. And then ultimately there was a nationalist movement to gain independence. So that happened. There was a nationalistic movement. That's the movement that many of my father's family's older siblings were involved in. Okay, so the French and the Vietnamese fought a war. The Vietnamese won, and what happened was the country got divided. So there was a Treaty of Paris that divided the North and the South, and they were supposed to have elections, but right away they started fighting. The North was with the communist Soviets, and the South was with the United States. So that war was 20 years between the North and the South, and for the Americans it was 10 years, right? So that's the Vietnam War that we knew about. That's the context, the historical context. So in April of 1975 was the end of the war. End of the war for the American soldiers, but it was really the beginning for a lot of the South Vietnamese that were left behind. So unlike the unification of like Germany, where the West and the East reunited, they wanted to be reunited, and it was a good thing. Whereas the end of the war wasn't a good thing. The communists didn't want anything to do with the democratic-leaning South, right? So what happens is, after the fall of Saigon was the mass exodus that maybe you guys have known about as the boat people, right? So again, right after the fall, 1975, about 150,000 out of 25 million South Vietnamese were evacuated with the US. I mean, that's a really small percentage, right, out of 25. And then from there on, you started having the boat people who, really just went to the South China Sea and sought refuge in islands that were accepting refugees. So that's the bulk of what you hear are the boat people, right? And then it became the numbers were these. It was ultimately 800,000 resettled around the world. About 200 to 250 perished trying to escape, and about 100,000 more eventually got sent back. So those were the numbers, and the story in that context was our family trying to escape. We were the South Vietnamese trying to escape. Okay, so we were definitely not the only one. I bet somebody in here knows somebody that did the escape or did the escape themselves, right? So what's unique about this story? A few things. Most of the people that escaped, there were these huge underground groups that set up passage, sold seats, and got people out. But things happened. People got thrown overboard. People got ripped off. People got sent to the authorities. It's just people taking advantage of that. And also, the only people that could do these things were those that were familiar with seafaring, fishing folks, villagers, not people that lived in Saigon, or city folks who've never done any of those. And those are, my family. That's us, right? But, my dad said, we could do this. I think we could figure this out. We can put this all together, make a plan, and we'll try it. We'll do anything to get out of here. And so I think that's some of the unique aspects of what it's like a DIY project. DIY project that, maybe it's the last one our family ever took together. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. But then as I wrote this book, we always took kind of a little bit of, we're proud that we did it on ourselves, but you know what? I started writing this book and I realized, we didn't. We didn't do this ourselves. There were so many people that came in and helped. And it was God's providence. It was just these beautiful characters that we would never met, and they helped us. And that was something that I realized as I wrote and finished the book, right? So a little bit just details on some of these characters, right? Because and you guys can ask me, or ask about some of the characters. So in the books, I try to talk about them, and I'll talk about tonight a couple, maybe more than a couple. So the first one was Din and Dao. It was these two sisters, and they met my mother when she was in prison. After the first escape, she was put in prison, and she saw these two girls, two sweet girls, but rough. They were smugglers. They had a shrimp paste company. They were smuggling shrimp paste up to Saigon. They were kind of not genteel or anyway, but they cried every night. She said, every night these two women look strong, but they cry because they miss home. They miss their mama. So my mom's, that's all she was. She's a mom, and she started talking to them and befriended them. And, the thing happened, which was they were sweeping the grounds one day, and they came upon this Reader's Digest. And in those, there were like pictures of what we see today, advertisement of like microwaves or, food. And, for these two girls who've lived in the countryside or peasants, they've never seen such things. And she's like, what is this? My mom's like, let me tell you, it's the United States, it's America, and they just hung on every word. And, eventually she found out that they had a boat, but more importantly, they became friends, right? So in the book is, they became pivotal in helping us escape and coming with us. Okay, so that's one really neat character. Another one is, when we first started trying to escape by boat, my dad was like, we're not gonna make it. We need a great mechanic. So we gotta get somebody to come with us, fix the boat on the fly when we're out in high seas. And so he instructed my brother, and I think I skipped me over this, it wasn't like we can just find a boat, get a boat, and go, right? It wasn't like that. We were city folks, and we just had to go and live in the villages for 2 years. My oldest brothers, he went and they lived, and so they were doing all the tasks that my dad was telling them. So one of the tasks is say, okay, now that we've gotten a boat, you got to go find this mechanic. He's like the genius mechanic. And so my brother found him, and they became friends. Again, this guy, the thing that's neat about him, he had a cowboy hat. The only guy in Vietnam that probably had a cowboy hat. And he probably just saw it one time on TV, and he thought that was the coolest thing, right? So my brother was told, look for this guy, he's got a cowboy hat, and he found him, and they became friends. But, when my dad said, we got to somehow get him to come with us, but you can't ask him. And he'll say, what are you guys doing? Escaping, or he'll turn you in. So my parents well, we just got to kidnap him. So my brother, kidnapped his, I guess, one and only friend. So that didn't turn out well. The escape didn't go through. The engine broke. And it broke in the way that if we had been honest with the mechanic, he would have told us, but we lied to him, and that's what happened. Okay, so he was somebody that was pivotal that we would never would have met. And then I'll just say this last one is there was this general manager at a resort, and in one of the trips, the final one that was with my dad and my brother, they were going, and they saw this resort, and they're like, that's nice, we're gonna just go there. And they beached their boat. They just drove it right in, and it's this really nice resort. And I laugh because I always think about that general managers and the people on the resort, because I can see myself oh man, I paid for this great vacation, now I got a bunch of refugees hanging out on the beach, right? But then this poor manager suddenly had to deal with a refugee crisis. And I don't know if he ever had any sort of training for that, but he did. He put him on aside from all the paying customers, and they just camped out for 20 days until the immigration folks figure it out. But every night this general manager came out, snuck them into the resort, gave them a warm meal, a bath, a place to shower, and he did it for 20 days. To these people who didn't know, right? And again, we didn't do this alone. Those were the people that came along the way. But I think with the characters, I'll end with this, which is they were people that probably weren't in the society that my parents were. And they helped in a way that we never could have imagined. And they were people full of integrity. The mechanic never turned us in. Could have done a bunch of things to us, he never turned us in. And the thing in return that I was most proud of my parents is they never took advantage of them. They never thought lowly of them. They treated them as friends. They welcomed these people. It's not like we just worked. They were in our homes. I was playing with Din and Dao. I remember them, So I think that's probably the most critical thing as far as these characters, and that I'm proudest that my parents treated them in that way. Okay, so those are some of the characters, and then maybe the last thing, and then we'll just open up for questions and answers. I hope you guys have questions. I'll try and have answers. Which is, why write this? And I already shared some of what I wrote it. But as I'm finding out there's reasons for why I wrote this that I didn't intend to, You know, and one of them was for the Vietnamese community. You know, I didn't think about it as writing because I'm like, you already know this story. I'm not writing for you, I'm writing for you guys, you know? But what I found was actually, I got calls, or not like that many, but like people that were younger that wrote and asked about like this and say, hey, thank you for writing this, because their parents didn't share it with them. And that's not surprising. It's because you get here, you work hard, you forget, and you don't spend the time talking about what happened in the past, right? And so I had grown children of maybe my generation or, you know, asking about their grandparents. And one of them said this, she was like, thank you for writing this, because now I understand a lot more. I used to get upset at my dad that he never voted for like important things. He really just cared about like these, like how were his taxes or his economic thing. And I was upset that he didn't care about bigger social issues. And she said, like, I understand now where he came from, and that's why he kind of looked at what he looked. And I was like, yeah, it's for you to do all this now. You vote for the social issues. He did the hard work, right? And so that was really nice, you know. And then another thing that I thought about was, as I talked to more, and there was, it's a story that's been written by somebody else. Up to now, I mean, like, all the Vietnam War movies, and I loved them. I thought they were spectacular. But they were never on the South Vietnamese side. And it was like a whole group of people had their narrative written by somebody else. Well-intentioned, but it's not your story, right? And something that occurred to me, which is when you don't have people writing about who you are, and they can't help it, they don't mean to, but there'll be stereotypes, there'll be ugly things that, you know, I'm not mad at anybody, I'm not mad at Hollywood or anything, but that's just a matter of fact, that's what happens. And I remember like growing up in the 80s, right? Growing up in the 80s, it wasn't easy to be an Asian kid, like an Asian guy, right? Especially, there was some really bad stuff. And some of my friends, you know, had some trauma about that and were, you know, just grew up with that, or pigeonhole into you're the workers, you're the, you know, the worker bee and all those things. And I can see why that happens, you know, that's the voice you hear and the things you see on TV. And that's one thing that I thought again about my journey is, you know, people ask me, were you traumatized? And I was like, I don't know, maybe if you're in like complete trauma all the time, you don't have trauma. Because it's always what it is, right? So that made me one thing. Or, you know, I got to see a different movie. Unlike 16 Candles and the ridiculous caricature of Long Duck Dong, the movie that played in my head was my brother, was my dad. You know, they were central to a story. They weren't the bit players that people laughed at. They were the ones that did something. They meant something. So whether I consciously thought of that or not, you know, that I think helped a lot. And that's why I think, I didn't write this for the Vietnamese community initially, but it has the impact on it that I'm really happy about, you know, to have somebody write about their stories, you know, and, you know, I'm really glad that there are more and more Vietnamese are getting into writing, into movie making, because like most immigrant groups, right, you go for the stable stuff, lawyers, doctor. Right now I would trade 6 lawyers for 1 great movie maker. So anyway, so those are some of my thoughts that I just wanted to share, but really, I like I said from the beginning when asked, what do you want to do with this, is that I'd like to have a conversation, you know, with my community and with my friends and family. So I don't know, do you guys have any questions? Ma'am?
Sure, I have so many, but I don't want to monopolize.
Sure.
How old, just a couple though, how old were you in 75? And what kind of boat did you wind up coming here on?
Yeah.
And when you got here, how did your family assimilate and get jobs and rebuild?
Yeah, so you gave me a 3-part question.
Yeah.
That's really good. No, that's great, thank you. How old was I? I was 5 and when the fall of Vietnam, and then got here about 7, right? And so as you can see, the early memories that I had that I wasn't sure to put in the book, you can tell, is right at that age where I don't know if you can remember, right? Okay, so then the second thing were boats, okay. So boats that, I think it's a great question to clarify something. When most people hear that we were boat people, they think that we were from Vietnam and then went all the way to the US. That's a long boat ride. It wasn't like Ellis Island, it was a boat, usually South China, went through the South China Sea, Vietnam to Malaysia or Singapore, right? So it's about a 5-day trip. Now, as I remember saying earlier, that they had some Coast Guard boats, some bigger boats, that big, huge operations put together with hundreds of people. But then ours was like, I think a 15-meter boat, just seafaring enough to go out to sea, do, catch fish. And so they were small boats, and so, that's a lot of the danger was not seaworthy ships. And again, it's not like you buy pieces of a boat, you put it together, and then you sail, right? Because nobody's selling boats at that time, The fishermen were really holding the keys to everybody, especially for families like us. Okay, so how do we get here? Well, I mean, there was a resettlement. There were several legal mechanisms along the way, and it changed. So the first one was the evacuation. We were a parolee status. Okay, so that's the first. And then, but it became such a humanitarian crisis where people were just dying trying to escape that eventually it was through the orderly departure process, and it was ODP, Orderly Departure Program, which is once folks got here, they could help bring others over, okay? And then once you got here, and usually you'd have a sponsor, right? So either some families, but the first wave didn't really have sponsors. They had charities, like churches were the main sponsors. So you'd have like a huge Vietnamese population out in the cornfields of Iowa because some Baptist church decided we're gonna just bring all of these over. That's how it happened, or in some other places. And then, how do we do it? Well, it's a long story, but, assimilated, And it's how did my parents assimilate us? Is that part of your question?
Well, yeah, and get jobs and.
Get jobs and everything. Well, I think again, we came over with the legal process, so we were ready to go. We all got jobs within the first month, so. And some of us even started mowing lawns 2 weeks later, right? So, but there were a lot of people that were helpful, and the government they were helpful. There was assistance, but there was definitely a vetted process. They had to know who you were, why you're coming, do you have a sponsor to do this, and so that it just wants to make sure that you can kind of take care of yourself to the best extent possible. So that was the process that we were fortunate to have. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you still talk to some of the characters that you mentioned since the escape was successful? And is there a where are they now you could give us for any of the characters? Doesn't even have to be the ones that you mentioned, but in general.
No. I mean, once you're on the island, you're just looking forward to your next life. And one of the things is, I would love if I heard Din and Dao are in Australia. And another, Nam Chao is in Australia. One of the guys that helped us, that rescued us on our first escape attempt, he's in Colorado. And so, they're still around, I think, and maybe if we can find, because I'm not on Facebook or Instagram, so I have no social media presence. I haven't been contacted by anybody that I would love to find them just to share stories.
It's just my curiosity, and maybe you don't remember, but at that time you were 5. Do you still remember the feeling, how you feel when they came and took your dad away?
No. I don't even think, when I saw him leaving, and again, it wasn't like they came to your house and took you away. They were really smart about it. They said, hey, we're gonna re-educate you, and we want you to show up and voluntarily do this. You know, they know, like, it's a lot easier if you just come to us, right? And so they said, you know, in the letters, they said, you're gonna be here according to your rank and file, you know. If you're kind of the rank and file, a couple days. If you're an officer, a couple weeks. You know, and many, you know, people stayed for 10s and 15 years. It wasn't a couple days or a couple weeks. So the answer is, I don't remember that feeling, or, you know, but I think maybe by then you're kind of used to these things, you know. I'll give you an example. So my wife read it, and I'd love to hear, like, which parts grabbed you, right? So her thing was, when we were on the boat, and the two littlest, me and my brother, were clinging onto my mom's legs as it was getting battered, right? And she thinks about her two boys, you know, and like, how did she do it? And how did they feel? And we're like, I didn't know how to answer. I'm like, but by that time, I mean, we've been through a lot, you know. We've been through my dad in prison, my mom's in prison, and I'm staying at home trying to, you know, figure this all out, you know, with my siblings as little kids. So you don't have those kind of, you know, feelings that we would sit down and say, did you feel like that? I'm like, probably not, you know. For example, I don't remember that, but my dad did later tell me what happened that night that he was taken. And he told me this. He said, okay, so they put us in like military trucks. And then we drove off. So they later on you find out that they took you to these, you know, satellite camps so that nobody would know, right? So they were driving, and, you know, it's pitch dark. They're in this, you know, military, and they drove, and they stopped. They stopped on a cliff, and they said, "Everybody get out, line up."
Wow.
And my dad was like, "This is it," you know. They lined them up, and I think my dad was like, you know, it's gonna end. And the next thing the guy yells, "Go to the bathroom." And my dad told me, and he said it kind of like, it was so funny. And he said it was all like, I didn't have to go to the bathroom then, I really didn't. But you know, that's the remarkable thing, is like, that's the kind of stuff, he like thinks about it and he's like, yeah, that was kind of funny. You know, and he wasn't like traumatized about it. It's really, maybe he's Sharon?
You mentioned that your father and your mother were taken away to prison.
Yeah.
I'm assuming they were on the boat with you when you were leaving. How did they come back so that they could then escape?
Okay, good question. So when I'm talking about my dad's prison, it was right after the fall of Saigon. All the officers were taken away to the re-education camp. So he was at re-education camp when we were at home, right? So it was just, you know, main thing is they just want to split the family. Dads aren't home, right? Something like that. So, by the way, the reason why he got out was because he had brothers. Remember, they were nationalists, fought, and then they divided the country. They had brothers in the north that helped him get out. So he got out in 8 months versus 8 years. It's almost like he had enough to understand what it was like, but it was in the camps that he figured out this plot. He's gonna like do the bow, get him out, right? So he got out, we did our first attempt, kidnapped Mong, got stranded in the ocean, came back, right? And so and my dad, actually there's the account in the book, when we got back, and I remember this, when we were lost in sea, that family that pulled us in, when we got to shore, my dad jumped off. Because he had to jump off, and because he knew that like if he's there, he's the first one they're after, so he jumped off. So he got away. And it's a neat story how he got away. So then we went home, right? So the two oldest brothers, who were the pretend fishermen, they went back to that village that they were embedded in. Those people were like, hey, we knew you were trying to escape the whole time. Now it's really convincing. And it's partly because one of the brothers wrote a love note to somebody, says, I'm leaving and I'm gonna miss you. And that girl he wrote to was the daughter of the chief of the Communist Party. So anyway, they were like waiting for him, and so they nabbed the two brothers, put them in prison, and my mom was coming down from Saigon, to give them provisions, they nabbed her. And so the three were in there while, my sister, 2 other brothers, and myself, all under 14, were just at home alone. While my father was still trying to find and, get the next escape going, and basically finding more, more revenues, more funding. I call it an IPO in the book. You're an M&A, so you'd like that part. So that's how they were separately imprisoned, right? And so that's why my dad, at the end, he split up the family and has 2 boats, is because he's like, we can't ever be caught in the same thing. We need, that. So, did I answer your question, Shane?
On the
What
boat
else?
that you came over, were all 4 kids in that boat, or did your father take some and your mother take some?
Yeah, we split up. So the boat that I went on with my mom and basically my mom at the end said, I'm not splitting up the kids. That's like asking me it's a Solomon question,
Sophie's choice.
Yeah. So she said, I'm taking all the kids. You stay behind, Dad. But my dad's like, I need the oldest. I can't do it alone. So it was my mother and all the kids, my dad and the oldest one, and other family members that he brought. So we were the first voyage. We got there safely.
When you say there, where's there?
Malaysia. We went to Malaysia.
Now, Malaysia's a big place.
Yeah.
And you're talking about 2 separate boats. How did
Yeah.
you guys connect?
Yeah, that's another. A prince. A prince came out of nowhere and did it.
I'm sorry, what?
A prince, yeah.
Is there a music show involved?
Yeah. So when we got to Malaysia, we went fortuitously to this island. Sent note back through an intermediary, another family. Hey, we're safe. So my dad went. He went to Singapore, and that's where he beached. The boat. They kicked him out. Singapore kicked him out. So he had to go find my mom and us, right? But while he was on that resort that he beached the boat, the Prince of Johor, that was his favorite place to stay. So one day my dad looked up and he said, like, all these helicopters, and he's like, who's that? Who's coming? And they said, the prince is coming. And the prince heard about this family over here, and he summoned my dad, and he said, tell me your story, my subject. And my dad, told him, where do I begin here? And he made a couple phone calls and like, your family is in here, and reunited us.
Wow.
But it wasn't a happy reunion.
No, it's a broken story. Steven?
Yeah, I do. Thanks for sharing your story and writing it. Question I had is, when you're a kid, you hear one story about your family and the legends in your family, and then when you get older, you realize sometimes your family are unreliable narrators, right? That there's perhaps a second draft of history that didn't make it.
Yeah.
So as you're telling us this story, I'm wondering, what were the second drafts that you came across, right? Were there
Yeah.
points where you're like, perhaps the character telling me the story isn't the most reliable narrator, and I'm just wondering how you
Yeah.
thought through that.
Good question. Well, first of all, these were stories from like when it happened, right? So I was a witness to some of this. I didn't know the details of an adult, right? But I knew about like these things, that it wasn't like revisionist history. And it's also really good that our family has a lot of like, I don't know how to say this. There's a lot of bickering. So if people are like saying some truthful things about like, yeah, dad was like this, and so there wasn't like a rosy picture at all. It was the utter truth, right? And then I feel good about like this portrayal, and I would say I left so many, off the table because I didn't do this when my parents were still alive. I knew a lot of, they did share. I mean, we talked about these things. But it was really on my oldest brother, and he's the one, if you read it, he was the central person that took care of all these things, right? And over the years when he would say something, people would challenge, you were just a kid. And as soon as they talked to him, they're like, oh, this guy's the real deal. He knew exactly the intricacies of seafaring. He knew they like Yui Deng, some of the most infamous like prisons that he was in. The people, the hard ones, are like, that dude knows it, because I can tell, right? But the most is like, where's Tuan? Really? Like, he's nowhere to be found. He's like, he's never even thought, it's so appropriate that he's not the narrator or the voice that we're hearing this. He's a true hero. He's never once like talked about, I wrote this book, sent it to him, he's like, oh yeah, thank you for doing this, that's really nice, you know. That's it. He's never like, when's the book coming out? And you know, and my wife saw his email, she's like, really? He said, oh yeah, it was a good time. I went back to all those places, you know. He enjoyed, like, he went back to the prison, he went, like, that's his life, that's all he knew. And he's like fearless, right? And so he doesn't think in these terms, and he doesn't care, like, in the sense of legacies. So maybe it's appropriate that his youngest brother cares about this stuff and puts it down, right? So it just worked out perfectly. So I think there's, you know, and that's also another thing is I hope somebody says like, oh yeah, I remember that family. You know, they did this, or, you know, and one thing was, look, my parents, you know, made some questionable decisions, kidnapping and subterfuge and all that. But I really can say this, every family, their children, their generations after that entrusted their lives to him, and every single one got out. He didn't lose one. You know, that's really cool. Go ahead, Nora.
So you and your brother, is it Steven?
Yeah.
You guys seem like you were really good friends
Uh-huh.
and like good siblings, had a good relationship.
Yeah.
What was it like for you and him to have to go through that at such a young age? And like, I know your older sister
Mm-hmm.
almost was like the mom. Well, your mom was in prison, but was there a big difference when she left?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was definitely a big difference, but the first part is, you know, Steve and I were close, and that's probably how we got through it. You know, he and I played constantly. You know, while my mom was gone, and sometimes my brother and my closest older brother, he's probably 11 or 12, and then Amy, who was 14, had to go visit my mom and bring food, and my dad was off trying to find people. Guess who was home alone? Like, Steven and I, we were like, I don't know, 6 and 9 in this huge house, you know, from prior to the war. It was a big house. And it was just us, you know, relying on each other. Every night we'd go check on the doors. We saved little snacks that we had from before, and we pretended not to be afraid, you know. But that's the exact relationship I had with him when we were on the island and here. You know, some of you know the story. I mean, Steve died, you know, and he was instrumental in my faith, in who I am, and everything I believe in. So it started back then. I mean, he became a Christian, he died, and through his death and me and him spending the last 3 months together is really who I am. You know, and our journey, for me and him, started back when we were lost on the ocean. My mom prayed and she said, if you get us out, you know, and he and I and her were the only ones that went to church when we got back. You know, my dad turned to other things to get him through. My mom turned to her faith. And
I was just thinking about your mom because I was fortunate enough to know her. What a lovely person she was and how proud she would be of you. But I remember her talking about the time she was in prison and that she could hear them beating your brother. Yeah. And I wondered, at what age did you start to understand how severe that time was for them? And then for them to talk about all of that, yet she was such a joyful, hardworking, loving, good person on this side of things. But she endured an incredible amount. To hear your child being tortured in a prison, you know, that would be so hard.
yeah, no, I think my mom is extremely strong. I never thought of her as that. Seriously, I just thought of her as my mom. And yeah, but I look back, and so the first thing is, as I'm writing is, I'm like, wait a minute, you know, before the war ended, you know, she lived a pretty good life. She had maids and you know, because that's where her family was before the war. And so it's not like she had kind of like training for this stuff, but she's pretty fearless. I look back and I was like, yeah, she was never fearful about anything. She went out and got a job right away. She couldn't speak any English. She went out and got a job, and she was the first person working, and she was a seamstress, worked the nights, you know. and she always pieced things together. She was not afraid of anything, but you look at her, you know, she's diminutive and really small, but like the strength of character was there. And to answer your second question is like, I can't say that I was like, oh wow, we went through a lot, or was that moment. It was just part of our lives. You know, I always see the scars on Twan's face. You know, if anything, writing this book just had more stories. Like, oh, that happened? Like, when, I never knew that when he shuttled us to our boat and jumped back, there was a stowaway that didn't want to go. And Twan's like, I either have to kill this guy, or how am I gonna get him so that he won't tell on us, right? And of course he didn't. I mean, again, he wasn't that kind of guy, you know? And so those are the things that to me are more traumatic. Like, wow, I had to live through that. But like the voids, because I lived those with him, you know? And also like, I would ask him like, okay, we know about the major stuff. Like, tell us about the day-to-day in prison. Was it like Midnight Express? And he starts telling these stories with a smile on his face. And again, so I think that attitude, like, I never like, oh, they went through really hardships, you know? And probably in humility, they're like, no, a bunch of people did that. We weren't the only ones. There are a lot of heroes out there, lots of courageous moms and dads and brothers, and to think that we somehow overcame this kind of is a little bit self-centered. Honestly, we'd be like, no, this is what everybody did to get here. It's no big deal. Everybody before us, every one of you, had that story. You're just maybe a few generations away. So it's really from that attitude of like, no, it's not. I mean, I know it's a neat story and we go back to it, but I don't have a measure that it's like, wow, it's something more monumental, because it's not your story. Your story is monumental in yourself. So I think that's the best way that I can answer is I never really saw like, whoa, so scary.
Kind of like a sink or swim situation, right?
Yeah,
Just,
a little bit of that.
whoever takes this survive.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think like the way to word this question, because I know you're so young, but were there any like specific situations or interactions or even just themes, whether it be your own or your families that went through, that kind of changed how you kind of perceive life and how you live your day-to-day, whether it be like work, just living in general, or just your relationships?
Again, I would say it's never one thing, you know. I started out sharing that, you know, just seeing a life that was hard, that could have been, shapes the life that I live now, right? So that's the thing that I take into account, right? And also, like, again, just, you know, not really holding yourself above somebody else. Like, I saw how needy you can be. Like, you know, I hate to say this, but in Vietnam, before the war ended, it was very hierarchical. You know, you were privileged, you were aristocracy, you were this, and you thought very differently about somebody else. And if that had stayed in me, I think that would have been a problem. You know, I really like myself. But I really saw that shattered within a generation, you know, and I think that's a good thing for our family.
When you decided to write the book, how long did it take between that decision and when you published it? And did you know, Twan was a big part of the story. Did you sit down and interview him and tape what he had to say? Is that how it went down?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the whole process was like this. Actually, it was like 10 years ago. And I know that only because I went back to the file that I picked up. It was like, book, 2015. I'm like, oh man, that was how long ago? So I started scribbling around. We always had these stories, so I always knew how to write it because we told these stories, whether in an abbreviated version, the long story after on a walk, right? I always knew how to write this. And I didn't read growing up. I didn't go to libraries. In fact, it's kind of ironic that I'm doing a book talk at a library, and I was like, are you serious? I'm like, are you gonna check my account? I checked out one book in the last 5 years, you know? But anyway, so back to writing the books. I'm like, okay, I kind of know the story that I wanted to tell, and I was writing it, and then, you know, then it's really about motivation. I wasn't motivated before. It's a good idea, and it's a nice thing to have. But then I was motivated once, you know, my parents passed away. I didn't do it by the time they were still living. And then my brother, he's really young still, but he's getting up there. And it's like, hey, if he goes, it all goes with him, right? Or the details. So yes, I then started writing and motivated by my children. And we had another one coming. I'm like, if I don't finish this before Luca's born, it'll be another 10 years before I finish. So I started just writing every night. And I was on the, Tuan is now back in Vietnam, of all ironies. He's 6 months out of the year in Vietnam, right? So it would be like 9 o'clock here, when after dinner, I'd call him up, you know, I'd say, hey, tell me about this, you know, and he's not a wordy guy. You worked with him. He's not a wordy guy. But I knew kind of like the story, so I pulled it out of him, you know. I did ask him, I was like, hey, when you and Dad were, you know, sailing for 5, what did you guys talk about? I was ready to like, oh, we talked nothing. You 5 days and you talk nothing. So I was like, what did you see? I saw turtles, you know. So I wrote about that. And how'd you feel? I felt okay. But it's like, yeah. So I you know, that's what I did. And then, you know, writing it. I would say, you know, I encourage people. I wrote about this. Like use AI. You know, don't let them write your story. Meaning, don't let them, like, you know the voice, right? You know how to be funny, whatever, your personality. You ask it to be, like, dramatic. It's corny, right? It's corny, it's synthetic, right? But it's really helpful with editing, but that's what you use an editor for, right? It's just cheaper editor. So you can put it in, it can soften a lot of things out for you. But, you know, it's, you just gotta write. You just gotta go in there and sure.
It sounds like you were born into a position of privilege.
Yeah.
That then got shattered.
Yeah.
How did that experience affect you raising your family now?
Great question. How does that, well, you know, it just tells me what I should be focused on. You know, it wasn't just that shattering. I had a chance to, you know, look into beyond my dad's in this recent history, and I saw my dad's family, and they have a remarkable story. You know, and I looked them up. They're in land records in France, and you know, people wrote memoirs about some of them. But one thing I noticed, they were all broken men, like in the sense of relationships. You know, they were powerful men, but they had horrible relationships with their wives, with their children. And my family, and my dad's family, so how do you repair that? You know, so for me, this has always been a journey of faith. Me, I didn't write about what I thought about this book. For me, it's a journey of faith because I see how God loves not just my family, but that whole family. And he wanted to have a redemptive opportunity for one of us to maybe change that. So I never say like, hey, but I take that opportunity to somehow not rebuild an empire, to build a different kingdom. Good question. Ma'am?
After the war ended, I remember, you know, I grew up around here and I would go to Great Falls. And especially in April, there would always be these big picnics with Vietnamese families. And I was kind of envious because my family, you know, it's just everywhere. We didn't have that big sense of community. Today, do you consider yourself a Vietnamese American? Do you have lots of connection with other Vietnamese Americans?
What a huge question. Lovely question. So back to your assimilation. And so, like, how did my parents, and I actually, my wife asked me that question last night. She's like, so how did your parents assimilate you? What did they do? And I was like, and it wasn't one thing, right? So I'll say this. Assimilation is kind of a little bit of political hot button right now, because what does that mean? Do we enforce? I'd say, you know, just the opportunity to make that choice, right? So this is how my parents, after thinking about it overnight, assimilated, or had us assimilated, and their reasons. But it was basically, my dad told me this. He says, if you want to be a success, just be a success. Don't be a successful Vietnamese attorney. Be a successful attorney, right? So, and he says, and if you ever want to help out the Vietnamese community, that's how you help them. Because you're successful here, not just here, right? So that's one of the things that he did. And then the next thing is he moved us into like an all-white neighborhood. I didn't see one Vietnamese kid. I didn't have one Vietnamese friend. So that's how you assimilate. It's like you just throw his kids and you say, hey, be successful, be there. You know, and I believe in assimilation. I believe in going to this country and, you know, you're a guest, you don't make your own ways. And that's how I believe, right? But, you know, if I had to do it, I would give my children a charge with some guardrails. You know, because I have to say this, I probably assimilated too well. You know, I didn't really understand or have connections with the Vietnamese community. But I always had a compass back to, like, anytime I did something well, I came back. Like, I remember I finally, you know, could have enough weight at the company I work for to start sponsoring stuff. I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna start sponsoring, you know, Vietnamese lawyers who are struggling out there, you know, but like I was gone for a lot of that time. And so I hope that answers your question. That's how my dad said similar. He just wanted us to embrace this country, never lose our heritage, always think back, right? But you do that better by not just confining yourself to that group. So that's his approach, and that's what he told me.
On that note, are you gonna teach your boys how to speak Vietnamese a little bit?
I guess I gotta learn how. I do speak Vietnamese, but I will. Honestly, my wife's biggest complaint about me being a Vietnamese is that I'm not Vietnamese enough.
I can attest to that. You were class president, 8th grade, I think?
Yeah, in high school.
Yeah. When he was a candidate, you guys wanna know what joke he said? So when he was on stage.
No.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay, let's start Star Trek. Yeah, okay.
It's okay. It's not here to
You
smear my
remember the joke.
reputation. No, I mean, high school was fine. I all my friends, I see some friends here from high school, and, you know, I don't know what you thought of me, but I just felt like I was a kid in Falls Church and went to school, and again, maybe I shouldn't have been just a kid.
Have you been back to Vietnam?
I have not. I don't have that connection. Like, I don't, right? So maybe that's something that I'm working on, but I did go back to the island that we were refugees on. That was lovely. I loved it, you know, but I never been back to Vietnam. A little bit of like, we escaped from Vietnam. I'm a little nervous to go back, but 50 years has gone by, lots of change. I'm completely, you know, ignorant about really what's there. My brother has a hard time with that. I mean, he doesn't give me a hard time. I mean, he's just like, you think about this country like 50 years ago. It's not like that, you know? So I need to, you know, think about that more, and I will. It's important. I think there's always a compass back to, you know, you see in the Bible, like, you know, people wanted to go back home to be buried where they're from their land.
That could be a second book.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
read that you self-published.
Uh-huh.
Is there a reason behind that? Did you present your book to publishers? Or what was just the process?
Oh, good question. I didn't. I'm just not, I was like, look, it's took me a long time to write this book. If I try to find a publisher, it'll take me another 12 years to get rejected all the time. So I had like no patience for it. And I looked back and I was like, yeah, this is where I get some of my stuff from my family. They're like, I can do this. I don't have to wait for somebody else. You know, I can publish this, I can write it, I can talk to people, you know. So I was like, I didn't know any better. But I just don't think, I don't know. I haven't been in that industry, and I just feel like I just would get rejected, and I don't know. God blessed me with a really nice career doing this at work. So this is just a joy to share this and to have moments like this. So thank you. It looks like we want to.
Thank you.
thank you very
for
much.
coming out.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're wrapped for tonight, but again, there's some flyers over there for upcoming programs as well as throughout the library, of course, so we hope you come to other programs in the future. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, and just one last thing, there is actually a May 17th. There's a really neat library near here, Thomas Balch Library. So I'm doing the same thing there. It's at 2 p.m. So in case your friends missed it and stuff, you can go there. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Nice seeing you.
Oh my goodness, không nhận chị ra luôn đấy. Đẹp ơi. Dạ, 17 tuổi, 16 tuổi rồi chị. Oopsie.
We're the same class.
Oh, really?